Hi, this is Susan Carlson and welcome to my studio. I would like to show you a finishing technique that I have for some of my quilts. It's something that I talk about in my book Serendipity Quilts, but it's nice to actually see how something is done in a video as well. So this is a finishing technique that I use that gives a very nice a nice look to your final quilt. It can hang on a wall just like this, and it casts a nice shadow underneath. So it looks like it's framed. It doesn't have glass on it, so it still keeps that nice tactile quality that we all like so much in our fabric and our quilts. What it is it's stretched on a stretcher bar onto stretcher frame. All of these are done in that way. Now, there's some different options you have as far as your stretcher bars go. All of these that I have here are stretched canvas. So the canvas gives a little extra support to your quilt from underneath. It's not necessary though. And stretcher bars also come in different widths. You can see this one is called a gallery bar, gallery stretcher frame, and it's really deep, has a depth to it, where these are more of your normal stretcher bars. And then there's also stretcher bars that you can get that are in inch increment lengths. So here I bought these at 2 6 inches to make a 6 by 6. It comes in all different inch increments. You can get them online at in certain stores and stuff too. Your third option would be if you want to frame something that's not a standard size that you would find, let's say for stretched canvas, that would be your limitation for that because it would be more standard sizes. Or maybe it's not an inch increment that you can get your stretcher bars for. Maybe you'll have to have somebody make it for you, either a handy person that you know or a frame shop can make you stretcher bars that are in any number of configurations of fractions of an inch or metric if that's what you do. So anyway, what you'll need to do to start is you have your quilt. Now the beauty of this is that the quilt is sitting on top of the frame and the edging is wrapping around in one continuous piece. What that means is that you're not stretching your quilt around. If you were to stretch a quilt around a stretcher frame like this, it gets very bulky, very fast, and it's not very pretty. So this eliminates that. So the first thing is your quilt, of course. And your quilt needs to be cut to match your frame with including your seam allowances. So for this quilt, this little one that I'm doing here, this is 6 by 6 inch frame, and I am going to cut my quilt 6.5 by 6.5 because I'm adding a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around it. That's important because if you cut it 6 by 6, it's not going to work. So remember, whatever your seam allowance happens to be, double it and add it to your quilt before you trim it to size. Then the next thing you want to do is figure out what your edge is going to be. You know, you can pick whatever you want that looks nice with your quilt. You'll see it from an angle, of course. In this one, I'm just going to pick this fabric right here. I need to figure out how wide to cut my band of edging. And for that, I'm just going to think it through. So I have, I know that my seam allowance is going to go down the edge of my stretcher bar. I know that my seam is right there at the top corner. Then I'm going to turn it to the back and I'm going to kind of tuck it under a little bit because when I go to stretch it with when I pull it to stretch it and then I anchor it down with a staple gun, I want to be able to pull it and staple through a couple layers of fabric. So once I figure that out, so I have all that kind of, kind of pinched in place there, I'm going to unroll it and kind of see how much that I pinched there and measure it, and I'm going to cut now that width, and the band needs to go, of course, all the way around your frame, so that's more than enough, of course. Now, next step is you take it to your sewing machine. We're going to pretend this is my sewing machine base right here, and I have my quilt. I have my band of fabric that's going to go around the edge, and I want to start stitching it. And it's a plain old straight stitch on for this, and I will fold down the edge of one of the edges of my band, so it's about 1/2 inch or so, and it gives a nice fold. That's your finished edge, because there's no seam you're not seaming all of this in the end, but there is an overlap. So if you look here, you can kind of see where that overlaps right there. And I place that overlap on the bottom of the quilt, because then when you're looking at it for real on a wall, you're less likely to see if there's any extra bulk from that fold. There probably won't be, but just in case, you put it on the bottom. So here's the bottom of this little sample quilt, and I start stitching like this. So I'm going to start right there. A little bit in from the corner again, so if there's any bulk, you don't see it right at the corner. And we're going to pretend this is my needle. I'm going to start stitching a straight stitch right down, and I'm going to sink my needle about a seams allowance away from this edge that I'm working towards, the edge of my quilt. And then I pivot on that needle, and then I realign my raw edges, slip my finger underneath here to make sure that I haven't caught any fold of fabric, and then I continue stitching down here, and then I sink and turn, and I keep going all the way around until I come back. We're going to speed this process up a little bit here, and come back to where I began and go over the top, and then I cut this off. And what I end up with is something like this right here. So here I've cut off my edge, and what it looks like is a square bowl, and that's what it should look like. Now I go back and cut my corners off to reduce the bulk, because this now is meant to fit around my stretcher bars, my stretcher frame, kind of like a glove. So let's do that now. So we got this stretched around, and you can see that it fits. It's going to fit very nicely. And I can feel the edge of my frame, right here, so that that edge, the corner, the top corner of my frame hits right where the seam allowance is. I can feel where the corner's hitting the corner. I can feel that the seam allowance is going down the outside edge. And when I get all those things kind of lined up, I will turn it around like this, and then turn under that extra fabric that I had figured into my measurement. And it makes it look a little neater too when you turn that edge under. But it gives me a nice bunch of fabric to kind of hold on to, and I'm keeping the pressure on here so it doesn't shift on me. And then I grab my staple gun and I'll put it here and staple right into there. And then I turn it around. If you're stretching things onto canvas or onto a stretcher bar, you work on opposite sides. So I would staple here, and then I'd go over and staple here and staple here. And then I go back and keep going back and forth until I start working toward the corners. And every time I do that, I'm going to realign, making sure my seam allowance is going on the outside edge, making sure that making sure that my corners match, making sure that these top edges match. And then you're supposed to pull it a little bit because you want it to be nice and stretched in the end. And as you keep working, it'll just falls together so nicely. It comes, these edges all kind of meet, and then in the end you take a little, kind of a little corner miter fold, and then do your final stapling right down into that corner. And what you end up with is something that looks very neat and tidy and very smooth. There's no bulk that's wrapping around the edge. And then I put in some screw eyes into the inside of the frame, and then you can hang it. This one, obviously, I'm hanging on a diagonal. So here you can kind of see that has a nice little effect too, which is very easy to achieve if you're, putting it onto this nice structure. So there you have it. Stretching your quilt onto stretcher bars, with or without the canvas attached, is a great way of finishing off your quilt. It makes it neat, it makes it tidy, gives a really good finished look to it, and it's ready for hanging. So have some fun, and thanks for watching this video.